The dogs smelled it first, their noses lifted, twitching, as something warm and bloody hit the dirt floor of the pen. The master stumbled back. His screams ripped through the plantation night like a warning bell. His hands clutched the space between his legs, a gush of red soaking through his trousers. And she stood there, breathing heavy, the blade in her hand still slick with his flesh. In that moment, just before the chaos, just before the other slaves came running, just before the overseer would grab his rifle, she looked calm, her lips pressed tight, her eyes sharp as iron. The master dropped to his knees. The dog circled, whining, sniffing. She tossed his severed manhood to the ground, where the dogs tore into it like meat. That's how this story begins, with blood, and with a woman who had taken too much for far too long. Before we continue with the video, kindly drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is over there, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. But who was she? And what did it take for her to reach this moment where vengeance became the only way forward? Let's step back. Her name has been lost in most of the records. Some whispered it as Sarah, others said it was Mary. The truth is, the plantation owners didn't care enough to keep her name alive. They only cared about what she could do: cook, clean, wash, bear children if forced. But let's call her Sarah, because her story deserves a name. Sarah was born in Virginia in the early 1800s. She never knew her father. She barely knew her mother. Sold when she was only 7 years old, traded for a bag of seed corn and a mule, Sarah's childhood ended before it ever began. The plantation where she grew up was run by a man whose cruelty had no limits. His name? John Harlan, a master with a thick beard, pale eyes, and a temper that could strike like lightning. For the white men who visited his estate, John Harlan was a gentleman. He was respected, a landowner, a man of means. But for those forced to live under him, he was a devil. Sarah's days began before dawn. The bell rang, chains rattled, the air still thick with mist. She swept the floors, scrubbed the pots, cooked the food she'd never tasted. She was beaten for moving too slow, beaten for standing too still, beaten for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then there was the night. That's when Master Harlan came, sometimes drunk, sometimes stoned sober. The sound of his boots on the wooden floor made Sarah's stomach clench. She learned to keep quiet, to bite her lip until blood filled her mouth, because crying only made it worse. For years she endured it. For years she carried the shame no one spoke of out loud. For years she prayed that maybe, just maybe, God would see her and strike him down. But God stayed silent. Every human has a breaking point. Sarah's came slowly, like cracks spreading in glass. She watched her friends whipped until their skin tore open. She watched children taken from their mothers, sold away screaming. She watched Harlan grin while he lit his cigar, as if cruelty was just another part of the day's work. And then came the night when he pushed too far. Sarah was 24. She had scars across her back, old welts that never healed right. Harlan had grown bolder with her over the years. He no longer snuck quietly. He wanted others to know she was his possession. That night, after forcing himself on her, he spat words that burned hotter than the lash. "You're nothing but mine. Nothing but my dog. Even your body belongs to me." Those words carved into her. Something inside her shifted. And for the first time, the fear loosened its grip. She began to think. She began to plan. Vengeance doesn't grow overnight. It grows in silence, in the shadows. Sarah started paying attention to the knives in the kitchen, to the times Harlan staggered drunk, to the way the dogs obeyed his voice but always looked hungry. She watched him, watched his weaknesses, the way he always loosened his belt after supper, the way he leaned close when mocking her, the way he trusted her to serve him because in his mind she was nothing. That arrogance became her weapon, and slowly her fear hardened into resolve. Life on the plantation was a web of secrets. Slaves whispered at night, their voices soft like wind in the trees. They shared news, shared warnings, shared dreams. Some whispered of escape, some whispered of rebellion. Sarah listened, but she wasn't looking to run. She wasn't looking to hide. She was looking to end him. Still, she knew one truth: a woman who strikes her master doesn't get to live. She knew if she acted, she'd pay the price. Her body might hang from a tree. Her name might never be spoken again. But deep inside, she was ready. Better to die in blood than live another night in silence. The night before it happened, the air was heavy. The cicadas screamed in the trees. The moon hung pale and watchful. Sarah's hand shook as she cleaned the kitchen knife, her reflection faint on the blade. Could she do it? Could she really take a man's life? Take the life of the one who had taken everything from her? She pressed her palm against the metal until it nicked her skin. The sting grounded her. Yes, she could. It was after supper. Harlan drank whiskey, his beard damp with grease from the meat she had cooked. He called her over. His voice was smug, commanding, as always. But tonight, she didn't tremble. Tonight, she moved steady. She stood close, too close. And when his laughter rang in her ears, she acted. The knife flashed. The sound was wet, sharp, final. He howled, a sound more beast than man. He fell back, clutching, blood spraying. Sarah didn't flinch. She held what she had cut in her hand. For a second, the world seemed frozen. And then she tossed it to the dogs. They lunged, tore it, devoured. The master's power was gone in an instant, and Sarah stood tall, the knife still in her grip as the plantation erupted into chaos. This was no ordinary act. This was no crime of passion. This was years of pain, years of humiliation, years of silence, exploding in one moment of raw, terrifying vengeance. The scream carried across the fields. It was so sharp, so raw, that even the cicadas fell silent. Slaves froze mid-task. Hoes paused in the dirt. Water buckets hung suspended in trembling hands. Everyone knew that voice, the master. Within moments, the big house erupted. The overseer, rifle slung over his shoulder, stormed through the porch doors. Servants rushed, tripping over each other, not knowing whether to help or hide. And there, on the wooden floor, was John Harlan. Face pale, eyes wild, body jerking. His trousers soaked crimson, his mouth open, howling like a dying animal. And Sarah? She stood over him, chest rising and falling, the knife still warm in her grip. For one fleeting second, their eyes locked. His pale blue eyes, glazed with terror. Her dark ones, steady, unflinching. Then chaos took over. The overseer's name was Clem Ryder, a man built like a tree trunk, with hands that knew the weight of a whip better than a Bible. He stormed in, his face red, spittle on his lips. "What did you do?" he roared. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The proof was there, gnawed between the jaws of Harlan's hounds. The overseer lunged. His fist cracked across her cheek. She staggered but didn't fall. "Hold her!" he barked. Two men grabbed her arms, wrenching them back. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. Harlan writhed, moaning. "Kill her now!" But Clem wasn't so quick. He wanted her alive. He wanted her broken. "Not yet," he hissed. "She don't get the easy way." Word spread like wildfire. By nightfall, every slave knew. Sarah had done the unthinkable. She had struck the master, cut the very part of him that he lorded over her. Some whispered in awe, some in fear, most in silence. And the quarter's eyes darted in the dark, hearts pounding. No one dared speak too loud because walls had ears, and ears carried messages straight to the whip. But in the silence, something stirred. Hope. If Sarah could rise, if Sarah could strike back, maybe they weren't as powerless as they thought. Sarah was dragged to the smokehouse, a place where meat usually hung from hooks. This time, it was her. Chains rattled as they bound her wrists above her head. Her toes barely touched the ground. Clem paced in front of her, a branding iron in one hand, a whip in the other. "You think you can humiliate a man like that and live?" he snarled. "You think anyone will remember your name?" Sarah stayed silent, her lips pressed tight, her face swollen from the beating. But inside she burned. Every lash of the whip tore her skin, but it couldn't tear the fire. Every press of the iron seared her flesh, but it couldn't kill the defiance in her stare. Clem wanted her broken. Instead, she became a living flame. Harlan survived. Barely. Doctors came, grim-faced, shaking their heads. "He'll never be the same," they muttered. His body lived, but his pride, his power, was gone. In a world where a man's worth was tied to his dominance, his virility, his ability to command respect, John Harlan had been stripped. Now he lay in his bed, pale and trembling, his dogs whining outside his window. He called for vengeance. He demanded Sarah's death. But deep inside, shame gnawed at him worse than any wound. He would never escape the whispers. They couldn't kill Sarah right away. Not yet. Clem Ryder wanted to make a spectacle. "She'll hang," he declared. "But not before she's paraded through every field, so every slave knows what happens when you rise up." So they kept her locked in the smokehouse, chained like an animal, blood crusting on her back. But Sarah wasn't done. Not yet. One night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked. Rain hammered the roof, and with it came a chance. The lock on the smokehouse door wasn't strong. The chain on her wrists was loose from her constant pulling. When lightning lit the sky, Sarah made her move. She slipped free. And just like that, the hunt began. The night swallowed her. Rain plastered her dress to her body. Mud sucked at her feet. She ran. Through fields. Through forest edges. Her breath ragged, heart slamming in her chest. Behind her, the dogs howled. Voices shouted. Torches flickered in the dark. "Find her!" Clem's voice thundered. "Find that bitch!" The hound sniffed, snarled, lunged. But the storm worked in her favor. Rain washed her scent. Mud hid her tracks. She darted through trees, branches tearing her skin, feet bleeding. Every step carried the weight of her past. Every gasp carried the sound of Harlan's laughter. Every tear carried the memory of nights she'd been forced, beaten, broken. And still, she ran. Sarah knew the land better than they thought. Years of gathering herbs, of fetching water, of sneaking scraps had taught her every curve of the earth. She headed for the swamp. Thick, treacherous. A place where even dogs feared to go too deep. The mud sucked harder. The water rose to her waist. Snakes slid in the dark. But Sarah pressed on. Behind her, torches lit the edge of the trees. The overseer cursed. Dogs whined at the swamp's edge, too nervous to follow. Sarah sank into the muck, chest rising and falling, her body trembling with cold. She stayed still, barely breathing, until the torches faded. She had escaped, for now. Days passed. Some claimed Sarah was caught and killed. Others swore she was still out there, hiding in the woods, living off roots and stolen food. The slaves whispered her name with reverence. Sarah became more than a woman. She became a symbol, a ghost, a flame that refused to die. Some said she crossed north, slipping through the Underground Railroad. Others claimed she was spotted years later in Louisiana, working as a midwife. A few insisted she haunted the swamps near the Harlan plantation, her spirit leading runaway slaves to freedom. The truth? No one knows. But John Harlan never recovered. His body weakened. His mind shattered. His name became a curse. And every time the dogs barked at night, he remembered. Remembered the moment Sarah took from him what he thought no one could. This wasn't just a crime. It wasn't just rebellion. It was a message carved in blood that even the most oppressed could strike terror into their oppressors. But let me ask you, do you think Sarah survived? Or do you think she was captured, erased, her body lost to time? Comment below. because the ending of her story might not be as clear as you think. After the storm, after the dogs lost her scent, silence fell over the plantation. A silence that felt unnatural, a silence that carried fear. The overseer raged, his voice booming across the fields. "She's mine. She won't get far. I'll string her up myself." But as days passed with no capture, that anger shifted into something else. Dread. Because Sarah was not supposed to disappear. A slave who struck her master wasn't meant to vanish into the swamp. She was supposed to hang from a tree, her body a warning. She was supposed to be erased, made into an example. Instead, she became something more dangerous. A story. In the quarters, whispers curled like smoke. "She's alive. I'd seen her shadow by the river. No, she's gone north. A preacher took her. Doesn't matter where she is. She did it. She cut him. That's enough." Around campfires, women told the tale in hushed voices, their children listening wide-eyed. They spoke of Sarah's courage, her rage, her knife flashing in the firelight. Even in other plantations, news slipped out. Traders carried it. Runaways whispered it. A slave woman in Virginia had risen and struck the unthinkable blow. Sarah's name, or the fragments of it, traveled further than she ever could. John Harlan never walked the same again. He spent weeks in his bed, writhing with fever, muttering curses. His beard grew wild. His eyes sunk hollow. His hands shook when he tried to write his name. But what tormented him most wasn't the wound. It was the laughter. Because sometimes when he closed his eyes, he swore he could hear Sarah laughing. Not in fear, not in pain, but in triumph. And that laughter drove him mad. Neighbors whispered he had gone insane. His wife, ashamed, bitter, left him for her sister's home in Richmond. His estate began to crumble. The man who had once strutted through his fields now sat trembling in a chair, haunted by the shadow of the woman he once owned. Some records claim Sarah was found weeks later, caught by bounty hunters in North Carolina. Dragged back in chains, her body gaunt, her feet blistered. They say she was hanged at dawn, her body left swinging, crows circling above. They say Clem Ryder made sure every slave watched. The crack of the rope meant to snuff out the spark she lit, but others tell a different story. They say she slipped through the swamps, guided by those who knew the land better than any overseer. They say she reached the safe houses of the Underground Railroad, that she crossed into freedom, maybe even made it to Canada. And some say she stayed, hiding in the woods, watching, waiting, a ghost in flesh. The truth has been lost, buried in time. But sometimes, when facts vanish, legends rise. Years turned into decades. Slavery ended, but Sarah's story didn't. Freedmen told it around fires, their children wide-eyed. Women whispered it as a warning and as a promise. "Don't forget," they'd say. "Don't forget what she did. Don't forget what's possible." For white folks, her story became a ghost tale. They said her spirit haunted the Harlan estate, her shadow slipping through the halls, her laughter echoing in the night. Plantation dogs, they claimed, would howl at nothing, whine at shadows, as if they remembered the taste of their master's shame. And even years later, when the house fell into ruin, travelers avoided the swamp. Because there, some said, you could still see her, a woman in torn clothes, eyes blazing, moving through the mist. What Sarah did was more than vengeance. It was rebellion. It was defiance carved in blood. And for slave owners across the South, her story became their nightmare. If one woman could strike so boldly, how many others might be waiting for their chance? Fear spread. Whispers of revolt grew louder. And Sarah's act, whether she lived or died, added fuel to a fire no whip could smother. She may have been erased from paper, but she was carved into memory. Picture it again. The dogs at the master's feet, the scream tearing through the night, the knife flashing in Sarah's hand. It wasn't just a crime, it was a statement. That even in the darkest chains, even under the cruelest masters, the human spirit can burn so fiercely it refuses to be crushed. And maybe, just maybe, that's why her name has blurred into myth. Because Sarah wasn't meant to be just a woman. She was meant to be a flame. So tell me, what do you think of Sarah? Was she hanged, her body left as a warning? Or did she slip away into freedom, her spirit carrying the story further than her body ever could? Comment below. I want to know which ending feels true to you. And if you're still here, if you felt the weight of her story tonight, don't forget to subscribe. Because these stories, the ones buried in blood and silence, they need to be remembered.